She didn't announce a relationship. She didn't deny wanting one either. Instead, Martha Stewart chose a sentence and a timing that quietly changed how people see her entire public life right now. When asked if she was bringing a date to the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan, Martha didn't hesitate. She smiled, paused, and said she was waiting to meet my Italian prince. On the surface, it sounded playful. But beneath that single line was something more deliberate, a shift in how Martha Stewart positions herself at 84, in public, in culture, and alongside one very specific companion. And almost no one noticed why this moment landed differently than her past comments about love. Because this wasn't really about dating. It was about control, timing, and why silence has become her most powerful signal. But this wasn't the moment that mattered most. The question itself was ordinary. Speaking at Radio Row on Thursday, February 5, Martha Stewart was asked whether she planned to bring a date, a boo, with her to Milan, where she'll serve as a correspondent for the 2026 Winter Olympics alongside Snoop Dogg, according to People and other verified outlets. Her answer wasn't defensive, it wasn't dismissive, and it wasn't nostalgic. Instead, she reframed the entire question. "I'm waiting to meet my Italian prince," she said, describing Milan as a very sexy city, adding calmly, "We'll see what happens there." What made this moment different wasn't the flirtation. It was the absence of explanation, no clarification, no follow-up justification, no insistence on independence or disinterest. And that restraint matters, especially for someone whose public life has spanned decades of reinvention. Because historically, when Martha Stewart talks about relationships, she explains them. But this time, she didn't. And that's where the signal starts. As recently as September 2025, Martha had made her relationship status very clear during an appearance on Today with Jenna and Friends. She stated plainly that she wasn't dating anyone special, but that she was happy, surrounded by friends, and fulfilled. That moment was grounded, practical, almost managerial. Before that, in December 2021, she briefly acknowledged having a partner on Watch What Happens Live, but refused to offer details. Each time, Martha controlled the narrative through clarity. This time, she controlled it through ambiguity. And ambiguity, when used deliberately, creates curiosity without triggering controversy, a rare balance in celebrity culture. What changed? The context. This comment didn't happen in isolation. Martha Stewart isn't just traveling to Milan. She's returning to the Olympic spotlight after Paris 2024. Again, not alone, but with Snoop Dogg. Their partnership has evolved quietly over years, from novelty collaboration to cultural shorthand for unexpected longevity. And right before this comment, Martha casually mentioned something revealing. She said she had been texting Snoop that very morning. Not about schedules, not about coverage, about outfits. "He wants more Ralph Lauren outfits," she explained, noting that she immediately called David Lauren to make it happen. It's a small detail. But small details are where Martha's public signals live. Because this wasn't playful chaos. It was competence, coordination, continuity. And it reframes the Italian prince line as something else entirely. Not longing, not loneliness, but optionality. At 84, Martha Stewart doesn't need to convince anyone she's desirable. That narrative has already been rewritten, partly by her, partly by culture. Her Instagram presence, often jokingly referred to as thirst traps by interviewers, has become a case study in intentional spontaneity. When People reporter Janine Rubenstein joked that she'd have no trouble finding a man, especially with those posts, Martha corrected her immediately. "No," she said. "They're all instantaneous, unplanned, fabulous things. That distinction matters. Planned desire seeks validation. Unplanned presence signals confidence. And that's why this comment landed the way it did. But this still isn't the full story. Because the most important part of this moment has nothing to do with Italy. On paper, Snoop Dogg is just her co-correspondent for the Winter Olympics. In reality, he's something else entirely. Snoop has become Martha Stewart's most consistent public counterbalance, not romantically, but symbolically. He represents unpredictability, cultural relevance, and ease in spaces where others might look calculated. And importantly, their dynamic removes pressure. When Martha says she's waiting to meet my Italian prince, it doesn't land as a plea or a hope, because she's already arriving with someone who guarantees attention, rhythm, and cultural gravity. That changes how audiences interpret her words, because when someone needs companionship, they over-explain it. When someone already has it, in another form, they don't. And this wasn't the first time Martha quietly demonstrated that distinction. In celebrity culture, relationship talk usually serves one of two purposes, either to confirm stability or to correct rumors. Martha Stewart's comment did neither. She didn't say she was single. She didn't say she was searching. She didn't say she was content. She left the sentence open. That openness isn't accidental. It's consistent with how she's been managing her public image over the last few years. She shows up complete, not closed. And that's why the Italian prince line works without explanation. Because it wasn't framed as a goal. It was framed as a possibility. And possibility is much safer and more powerful than declaration. But this raises a deeper question. Why now? The timing of this comment matters more than the content. Martha Stewart is entering another global broadcast moment. The Olympics amplify personas, not just performances. Every word spoken during Olympic coverage gets replayed, clipped, softened, or exaggerated. Knowing this, most public figures minimize personal commentary. Martha didn't. But she also didn't escalate it. She chose a line that could survive repetition without needing defense. That's not spontaneity, that's calibration. And it suggests something important about how she views this stage of her career. Earlier in her life, Martha Stewart explained herself often. Her work, her choices, her setbacks, her personal boundaries. Now she lets moments do the talking. The Olympics aren't just another job, they're a backdrop. A place where presence speaks louder than narrative. And in that context, saying less becomes the signal. This mirrors a broader shift we're seeing across legacy figures in entertainment. They don't announce transitions anymore. They let audiences notice them. And almost no one noticed that this comment fits that exact pattern. It's tempting to frame this as a dating headline. But doing so misses the larger point. Because Martha Stewart isn't positioning herself as someone seeking change. She's positioning herself as someone open to it, without urgency, without performance. That distinction matters in a media environment that thrives on extremes, especially for a woman whose public identity has been repeatedly boxed into eras. This moment resists that framing, and that resistance is the message. But there's still one layer we haven't addressed yet. The reason this comment felt lighter than her past ones. There's a reason this comment felt lighter than Martha Stewart's past reflections on love. Not because it was funnier, not because it was flirtier, but because it wasn't carrying weight. In earlier interviews, when Martha spoke about relationships, the context always did some of the work. She spoke after questions about loneliness, after career retrospectives, after moments that invited explanation. This time, none of that was present. She wasn't responding to speculation. She wasn't correcting a narrative. She wasn't closing a loop. She simply added a line and moved on. That's not accidental. That's what people do when they don't feel observed in a threatening way. And that tells us more than the sentence itself. Martha didn't elaborate. She didn't contextualize her past. She didn't contrast herself with anyone else. She didn't lean into humor to soften the moment. She trusted the audience to sit with it, and that trust signals a shift. In media psychology, over-explaining often signals vulnerability or defense. Under-explaining signals comfort. Martha Stewart didn't protect the line. She let it stand. And that's why it didn't become controversial, despite being quoted everywhere. There's another layer here that often goes unspoken. Martha Stewart doesn't travel into these global moments alone. She arrives with Snoop Dogg, consistently, visibly, and without commentary. Their companionship has become normalized to the point where it no longer needs explanation, and that normalization matters, because public companionship reduces the cultural pressure to define private relationships. When someone is already seen, they aren't asked to prove connection. And that's the environment in which a line like Italian Prince can exist without scrutiny. But this raises an uncomfortable realization. What if the comment wasn't meant to go anywhere at all? This is where interpretation becomes more interesting than speculation. According to publicly available information, Martha Stewart has repeatedly emphasized that her friendships keep her happy. She has not expressed urgency. She has not expressed dissatisfaction. So what if this line wasn't a hint? What if it was a boundary? A way of saying, I'm open, but I'm not explaining. That's a powerful stance, especially for a woman whose life has been endlessly narrated by others. And it reframes the entire moment, not as a tease, but as a pause. Most celebrity dating headlines expire quickly. They rely on updates, confirmations, reversals. This one doesn't, because it doesn't require follow-up. Whether Martha meets someone in Milan or not, the meaning of this moment doesn't change. That's rare, and it's intentional. Moments designed to last don't ask for resolution. They ask for observation. But there's still one final piece missing. The reason this comment works specifically now, in this cultural moment. This comment wouldn't have worked 10 years ago. Not because Martha Stewart was different, but because the audience was. Today, visibility is constant. Explanations are expected. Silence is often misread as absence. And yet, the figures who feel most durable right now are doing the opposite. They're speaking less. They're letting moments exist without captions. Martha Stewart's Italian Prince line fits perfectly into this shift. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't provoke correction. It simply occupies space. And that's why it landed. Because in a culture oversaturated with declarations, restraint feels refreshing. For decades, Martha Stewart was positioned as an authority. She told people how to cook, how to host, how to organize. Even her public setbacks were narrated with instruction. Now, something subtle has changed. She's no longer instructing, she's observing. And observation allows room for ambiguity without insecurity. This is why her presence at the Olympics matters. She's not there to dominate the frame, she's there to exist within it. And that shift reframes how everything she says is received. For decades, Martha Stewart was positioned as an authority. She told people how to cook, how to host, how to organize. Even her public setbacks were narrated with instruction. Now, something subtle has changed. She's no longer instructing, she's observing. And observation allows room for ambiguity, without insecurity. This is why her presence at the Olympics matters. She's not there to dominate the frame. She's there to exist within it. And that shift reframes how everything she says is received. At its core, this wasn't a romantic declaration. It was a positioning statement, a way of signaling openness without surrendering control. By choosing a phrase that invites curiosity but resists analysis, Martha Stewart demonstrated something rare. She allowed herself to be interpreted without being defined. That's not accidental, that's mastery. And it explains why this moment feels calm instead of performative. The most interesting part of this story isn't whether Martha Stewart meets someone in Milan. It's that she doesn't need the outcome to justify the moment. She arrived complete, visibly connected. And because of that, the question of romance becomes optional, not central. That's the real shift. As Martha Stewart heads to Milan with Snoop Dogg, stepping once again into a global spotlight, one question lingers, and this video intentionally doesn't answer it. Not who she might meet, but whether this era of her public life is less about relationships and more about redefining what presence looks like when explanation is no longer required. Because the next signal won't be announced, it'll be noticed, and that's what makes it worth watching.